Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Heath. I'm the Executive Director for Golden Isles Arts and Humanities Association in Brunswick, Georgia. And you are here with me for a little Cinema Gourmet Rewind. For those of you that are familiar with the organization, you know that we've been doing a series for the last 5 or 6 years called Cinema Gourmet, where we enjoy a great meal and we have a talk about a film and why it's good and fun facts and trivia. And then we watch that movie. But of course now we cannot do that. So we thought it might be a good idea to try and see if we can put some of this, at least, not the food portion, but the talk portion online, and then share with you some places that you can check out the movie or see the movie and still have partial experience. Of course, you can get your own gourmet at home, or just grab a glass of wine or your favorite beverage. So we'll get started right away. And we're going to be talking about rewinding back to one of my favorite movies, and I hope it's yours, Casablanca. We actually did this talk about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe, I think 2016. So we're really happy to be able to share that. And I'm just getting the PowerPoint up for you so you can see what I'm talking about, and we'll just go on through this. So thank you for joining us, and let's get started with Casablanca. Now, before I start, I do want to say a thank you. Apparently, at the time that we did this one, I usually do these talks and do the research, but I think I was really busy and I don't remember what I was doing. And so I had some great help from these wonderful folks, Lisa and Jim Jenkins, my sister and brother-in-law, who did a lot of the research and put most of the talk together in the PowerPoint. So I'm really grateful to them because they always do an exceptional job. So thank you, Lisa and Jim. So Casablanca. Now, when you hear that one word, you have a reaction. And whether you've seen that movie or not, you probably can quote a line or two from it, even if it's not really an accurate quote. Because Casablanca is probably the most quoted film of all time. 6 quotes made AFI's top 100 movie quotes list. That's more than any other film. Of all the gin joints and all the towns and all the worlds, she walks into mine. We'll always have Paris. Round up the usual suspects. Louis, I think this is the start of a beautiful friendship. And of course, here's looking at you, kid. And the last one. But we'll talk about that a little bit later. But, there's also, besides these, other great lines, some of them just full of melodrama. You'll have to do the thinking for both of us. Ones that are full of humor. What is your nationality? I'm a drunkard. And remember, this gun is pointed right at your heart. That is my least vulnerable spot. And there's even poignancy. It's December 1941 in Casablanca. What time is it in New York? I bet they're asleep in New York. I bet they're asleep all over America. Casablanca is a movie of its time, yet it is timeless. It was written and produced and set during the Second World War and released earlier than planned to coincide with the events that were going on in the world. But this film has endured far beyond other movies of the same general ideas and settings and time. Why? This is not a great cinematic epic, or it wasn't groundbreaking use of filming techniques, and it's maybe not even an overall masterpiece of script and cinematography and techniques like, say, Citizen Kane is, that it still endures. It is the one that grabs our hearts And we can watch it over and over again, loving and appreciating and being moved by it each and every time. Why? Well, quite simply, it is the perfect blend of all the elements of time and place and film that come together fully realized in the characters and what they represent. Now, when Casablanca was released, the entire world was at war. I mean, it's hard for many of us to realize or remember now that no one knew how this was all going to turn out. I mean, in 1942, things were going pretty well for Nazi Germany and the Axis countries. People were fleeing from those countries in Nazi rule. And the US had just been attacked by the Japanese forces at Pearl Harbor and had just entered the war. Exiles and refugees were stuck in limbo in places that Casablanca very much represented. And the Vichy government of France was very, very careful to follow the Nazi dictates as their rule expanded across Europe. In 1938, a high school teacher and his wife, his name was Murray Burnett and Joan Allison was her name, they traveled to German-occupied Vienna to help Jewish relatives smuggle out money. Now, when he returned to the United States, Burnett had the idea for an anti-Nazi play in which an embittered saloon keeper keeps a crusading Czech newspaper editor, he helps him to escape from Casablanca with the woman that the saloon keeper loves. So, co-written with his wife, the play was entitled Everybody Comes to Rick's, but it could not find a Broadway producer. But in late 1941, Warner Brothers story editor Irene Diamond, she was in New York looking for new material, and she found the play, and she convinced her boss, producer Hal Wallace, to buy it. It's Hal Wallace. So Wallace bought Everybody Comes to Rick's. He spent $20,000, and this was the highest price at the time for an unproduced play. They quickly renamed it Casablanca in imitation of the 1938 hit Algiers, and they scheduled to begin filming 4 months later in April of 1942. Now, in those years, every movie production studio was making movies about war and about people in the war, as well as escapism movies so that you didn't have to think about war. Movie studios were releasing 35 to 50 films per year. Casablanca was only one of a dozen war films that were made that year. And no one expected it to be anything remarkable. Now, after buying the play, Hal Wallace handed it off to the twins, Julius and Philip Epstein, who were the top screenwriters of Warner Brothers. Now, they worked on it until early 1942, and then they left to work with Frank Capra on the series Why We Fight. Howard Koch was then assigned to write and is the other credited screenwriter. Now, he highlighted the political and melodramatic elements. Casey Robinson is uncredited as a writer, but he contributed about 3 weeks of rewrites, specifically the series of meetings with Rick and Ilsa in the cafe. Then 3 other writers also worked on the script, including Hal Wallace, who contributed the final line. Julius Epstein later said that the screenplay contained more corn than was in the states of Kansas and Iowa combined. But when corn works, there's nothing better. So despite the corn and the many hands that were involved in the script, it really is very dynamic. I mean, it sets up the premise immediately. 2 Germans carrying letters of transit have been killed and the letters are missing. And for a movie with very little action, I mean, it is extremely fast-paced. The script also is full of comedy, from the physical comedy of the pickpocket to the quick, almost throwaway remarks of Renault and Rick Blaine. One thing that is just so masterful about this script is that every single character has an angle. There isn't one person in this bar who isn't looking to push their own agenda. Ugarte wants to sell the letters of transit. Reynald wants to impress Strasser. Strasser wants to take down Laszlo. Laszlo wants to escape to America. Rick wants to avoid Ilsa. Ilsa wants to talk to Rick. And all these angles come clashing together, creating conflict, which makes drama, and that's what makes it captivating and entertaining. And we don't have just one hero in this movie, but several. I mean, even though it takes a while for the main hero, Rick, to find his heroism, which is another great tenet of drama. He is a flawed character. I stick my neck out for nobody, is Rick's mantra. But it comes from a place of very deep personal hurt. And we take his journey with him to resolving his bitterness and his redemption by serving the greater good. Now, having already worked with him on the adventures of Robin Hood, Hal Wallace chose Michael Curtiz, a Hungarian Jewish emigre, to direct. Now, Curtiz was something of an auteur. He directed films in every possible genre. And he was a master of staging action sequences, but he also knew how to allow the story to be the important player. Now, when you watch the film, look for some of his techniques and repetitive themes. I mean, this film is meticulously constructed as the script. There isn't a single wasted scene. Every single scene in the film advances the plot and tells us something that we need to know. Parallel action is subtly used, and it adds depth and weight to the story. I mean, it's almost subliminal. I mean, the most notable is the matching shots towards the end of the flashback sequence. Bergman is drinking with Bogart at a cafe, and on the day that they're scheduled to flee Paris, she knocks over her champagne glass and spills her drink on the table. As we come out of the flashback to the present action, Bogart, having reminisced the events we've just seen while drinking in his office, knocks over his glass and spills his drink on the table. Be sure to note all the shadows. This is a very film noir. Signs, casting shadows. Note how the shadow on Laszlo and Ilsa, it creates both a prison bar, they're trapped, but it's also a cross, which means freedom. Rick opening the safe. In this shot, it looks as if Renault is casting this shadow, which creates the idea that the men are perhaps both of the same character. Also look for the use of mirrors, creating both style and meaning. I mean, here we have Ilsa. She appears when there are literally two sides to her, each in love with a different man. Now, one amusing story of Curtiz is due to his Hungarian accent. One day he asked the prop man for a poodle to appear in one scene. So the prop man searched high and low for a poodle, and when everybody was waiting, and finally he found one and presented it to Curtiz, who screamed, a poodle of water." Jack Warner had originally offered George Raft the role of Rick, but he turned it down, as he had with two other roles that eventually went to Bogart, Mad Dog Earl in High Sierra and Sam Spade in The Maltese Falcon. And there was some studio publicity that went out there that Ronald Reagan would be cast as Rick Blaine, but that was just a rumor. Hal Wallace always said that he wanted Humphrey Bogart as his first choice for the cafe owner, Rick Blaine. While this was Bogart's 45th film, It was his first romantic role. And Wallace did have one stipulation. Bogart should not wear a hat too much as Rick. Wallace thought it made him look more like a gangster. Ilse Loon's character was another matter. Anne Sheridan, Hedy Lamarr, and a French actress, Michelle Morgan, were considered. Morgan, however, was holding out for more money, and Wallace didn't want to pay. But he did want to cast a European actress, so he offered the role to Ingrid Bergman. Now, she didn't want the role because she thought the material was kind of just fluff. Bergman was wanting to be cast in For Whom the Bell Tolls, which she thought would do wonders for her career. But fortunately for us, she did take the part. And she does give a vulnerable and brave performance. It's totally believable, her conflicting emotions between Rick and Victor. There was a problem, though. A real difference in height between Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman. I mean, she was 2 inches taller than he was, which led to stories of Bogart sitting on cushions when sitting next to her, Bergman having to slouch next to him, Bogart wearing platforms when standing next to Bergman. You notice when you're watching that when Rick and Ilse are sitting next to each other, they're almost only shot from the waist up. Ironically, even though audiences identify these two actors as, working together so closely and often, Casablanca is the only film that Bogart and Bergman made together. Paul Enried, an Austrian actor, had immigrated in 1935 to flee Nazi persecution. And he was also reluctant to take on the role of Victor Laszlo, as he thought that playing a secondary character would ruin his career as a romantic lead. But he did take the part when he was promised top billing with Bogart and Bergman. Enried did not get on well with his fellow actors, and he thought Bogart was a mediocre actor, and Ingrid Bergman called him a prima donna. Hal Wallace almost made the piano player a woman because he was considering Hazel Scott, Lena Horne, and Ella Fitzgerald to play the part. But, however, Dooley Wilson was cast as Sam, Rick's piano player and friend. The only problem was that Wilson was a drummer and he couldn't play the piano at all. So on set, another piano player would be just off screen and Wilson would try to mimic his arm and hand movements. Claude Rains, an English actor, gives his Captain Louis Renault a realistic blend of good and evil. Like Rick, when we first see him, Renault is about preserving himself first. I love Claude Rains. I think he is truly a wonderful actor. And to me, he almost steals the movie. His Captain Renault drives the film's attitude. It's a blend of danger and humor on a journey from a practical person to a very moral person. The role also earned Rains the second of his 4 Oscar nominations. Now, because of the war, and also to increase the profits from foreign distribution, the studio suggested that all the unpleasant characters or bad guys, other than the Nazis, they should be from an enemy country, namely Italy. So, Sidney Greenstreet is Signor Ferrari, Peter Lorre is Signor Urgat, and the pickpocket are all portrayed as Italians. Konrad Veidt, he's a German actor, was cast as the German Major Strasser. He was well known for his hatred of the Nazis and his friendship with the Jews. His wife was Jewish. And he was forced to escape Germany when he found out that the SS had sent a death squad after him. Veidt actually had it in his contract that he would only play villains because he was convinced that playing suave Nazi bad guys would help the war effort. Interestingly, he was also the highest paid actor on the set, earning $25,000 for 5 weeks' work. Now, as a rule, Wallace and Curtiz wanted to give Casablanca a very authentic feel, and so they cast as many actors as they could of different nationalities. The studio declared that up to 34 different nationalities were represented in the making of Casablanca. And in fact, only 3 American-born actors are credited, Humphrey Bogart, Dooley Wilson, and Joy Page. And she plays the young Bulgarian woman who is willing to compromise herself to save her husband and herself. Another parallel moment in the film. Now, the large proportion of real refugees and emigres as actors on the set, it really does contribute to the emotional impact of the film. Witnesses to the filming of the dueling anthems sequence said that they saw many of the actors crying, realizing that they were all real refugees. Algene Harmetz is the author of Round Up the Usual Suspects, The Making of Casablanca, and argues that they brought an understanding and a desperation to the set of Casablanca and their small roles that could never have come from central casting. Now, the music was written by Max Steiner, who is best known for Gone with the Wind's music, but he was also really the go-to guy for music in Hollywood. And from the beginning, Steiner wanted to compose his own song for the movie, but the speed at which the production was moving didn't allow for that. I mean, they had already shot all the scenes using the song As Time Goes By, which was written by Herman Hupfeld in 1931, and it was part of the story from the original play. So the producers would have had to reshoot all of the scenes with Ilse, which incorporated the song, but Ingrid Bergman had already cut her hair for her next role, For Whom the Bell Tolls. So Max Steiner just based the entire score around that song and La Marseillaise, the French national anthem. And you can hear how masterfully he weaves the musical motifs throughout the score. The production did begin late. It was originally slated to begin in April of 1942, and it didn't really start till May 25th. But the filming was completed 5 weeks later, and it came in over budget, but that was about average for the time. But when filming began, the script was only half finished, and the writers really only stayed about 2 or 3 days ahead of shooting. So because of this, the film was shot entirely, almost entirely, in chronological order. Only a few shots were edited in later. Bogart was called in a month after the end of filming to dub the final line, and he was also directed then to go on set and just nod his head, which he did. And that nod, though, is a pivotal moment. It's where Rick gives his assent to allow Laszlo to lead the bar patrons in singing the Marseillaise. And it's also perhaps the moment where we begin to see Rick's character begin to change. Also, due to the fact that the script wasn't finished, at one point in the shoot, Ingrid Bergman went to director Curtiz and asked him which man Ilse Lund was supposed to love. His answer was to play it between. In fact, no one knew which man Ilse would board the plane with until that last day of the shoot. Ilse's love of both men, her romantic love of Richard Blaine, and the love she has for Laszlo and the importance of his cause, they feel both real, and they just keep her in a struggle for this entire movie. Many, many endings were discussed for the movie too. Having Laszlo killed in Casablanca, which allowed Rick and Ilse to leave together, Rick and Ilsa leaving Laszlo behind, except the production code did not like that because she was a married woman and she wasn't allowed to do that, so that couldn't happen. So what to do? Well, as the story goes, it was the Epstein brothers who were back at work on the picture, and they were driving down Sunset Boulevard to the studio, and as they stopped at a light, they turned to each other simultaneously and cried out, "Round up the usual suspects." By the time they got to the studio, they had worked out the final scene between Ilsa and Rick. Now, due to wartime restrictions, the entire shoot was done on a soundstage, except for the sequence here showing Major Strasser's arrival, which was shot at the Van Nuys airport, and the use of the stock footage from Paris is what was used. Again, because of war shortages and restrictions, Rick's Café Américain was the only original set built for the movie. And it was built in 3 sections. So there's no real floor plan for the cafe. Its internal layout was very indeterminate. So Curtiz uses all the tricks in his book to turn Rick's Cafe into a 3-dimensional space. He begins many scenes you'll see looking through windows or between posts. Here he does the same thing with a shot in Renault's office. So you notice how it gives depth to the sets, and it also sets up the intimidation of Strasser. Also, no nighttime shooting was allowed at an airport. So the final scene was recreated on the soundstage. They had a cardboard cutout of a Lockheed Model 12 Electra Junior airplane, which was placed in the background. You can see it in the picture back there. And to create the illusion of distance, little people were used as extras dressed in airline coveralls, and they walked around in the dense fog to mask the unconvincing prop. But really, who's looking at the background? Humphrey Bogart and Ingrid Bergman are riveting, and they demand all your attention. Interestingly, though, there were plans for a final scene showing Rick, Renault, and a detachment of Free French soldiers on a ship to incorporate the Allies' 1942 invasion of North Africa, but it proved too difficult to get the actors back together for the shoot. So the scene was finally abandoned when David O. Selznick watched the movie, and he said it would be a terrible mistake to change the ending. I agree. Again, timing. Although initially slated for a 1943 spring release, the film premiered at the Hollywood Theater in New York City on November 26, 1942, to coincide with the Allied invasion of North Africa and the capture of Casablanca. It went into general release in January of 1943 to take advantage of the Casablanca Conference, a high-level meeting in the city of Casablanca between Churchill and FDR. However, the Office of War did not allow it to be screened to troops in North Africa, believing it would cause resentment among Vichy supporters in the region. Casablanca was nominated for 8 Academy Awards, and it won 3 for Outstanding Motion Picture, Best Director, and Best Writing Screenplay Adaptation. Now, when the win was announced for Best Picture, Jack Warner, the head of the studio, ran up the stage and accepted the award. Hal Wallace, the producer and creative driver of the picture, who should have been the one to accept, never forgave Warner, and he left the company a month later. Now, since its release in 1942, Casablanca has widely influenced popular culture, being referenced as early as one of Bogey's own films, To Have and To Have Not, and parodied and imitated and honored in everything from the Marx Brothers' A Night in Casablanca to Bugs Bunny in Carrot Blanca and of course Woody Allen's comedy Play It Again, Sam, which is probably why most of us know the quote incorrectly. Because the quote is, "Play it, Sam. Play as time goes by." Casablanca holds a high place because there is something for everyone. One film scholar called it a woman's picture for men. And it's true. It's a love story, but one that is full of sacrifice. And that's what makes it great. These characters are not cut and dried. They change and they get caught up in the emotional struggles of the people and events around them. This movie is a blend of drama, melodrama, comedy, and intrigue, and it has nobility. The problems of these three little people do matter. I think Jason Frawley of thefilmspectrum.com says this best. They are not superheroes with superpowers, but ordinary people doing extraordinary things when the stakes couldn't be any higher. That is the true definition of heroism, when fate, love, and duty collide into action. The film's timeless truths will endure. As long as there are sentimentalists, there will be a place for Casablanca. It will live on forever. We'll play it again and again, Sam. No matter how much time passes, it's still the same old story, a fight for love and glory, a case of do or die. The world will always welcome lovers as time goes by. And I hope you enjoyed that little presentation about the film. Now, we will be screening that movie on Thursday, October 22nd, 2020 at 7 p.m. at the Historic Ritz Theater. We do ask for reservations for safe distancing in the auditorium, and we do ask for a donation to help us cover the costs. So you can email us or give us a call. Or if you've seen this after the fact, you can also screen this. I can believe it's streaming on HBO Max is where you can stream it. Amazon has it available for rent, Amazon Prime or online. But of course, you can always go to your local library and check it out for free as well. And I know Turner Classic Movies will occasionally be running it. But if it's also one you should probably have in your collection if you're an avid movie fan too. I really, really appreciate the time. I'm so glad that you could join us and tell folks. And we will be trying to do another Cinema Gourmet Rewind next month in November. We'll keep you posted about that. Again, if you need more information, you can email us at info@goldenislearts.org or give us a call at 912-262-6934. Thank you so much for your time and have a wonderful evening. And here's looking at you, kids.